The 6-month investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's alleged insurrection came to a conclusion on Monday. And the special prosecutor's probe is reshaping the legal and political narrative around the former president's declaration of martial law. For more, we are joined by our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun here in the studio. Welcome, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Tammy.
So, Hae-ryun, the former president argued that the martial law was a response to a political emergency tied to the 2024 general election, but the special investigators tell a different story. Now, what did investigators really uncover about when and how all the preparations began?
So as you've said, Tammy, the special prosecutor's conclusion directly contradicts the former president's explanation. And investigators are saying that the preparations for the martial law declaration actually began before October 2023, which is well ahead of the April 2024 general election that former President Yoon Suk-yeol cited as the trigger. So rather than an emergency response, the probe describes the declaration as a long-term political decision discussed and developed over more than a year. According to the findings, Yoon referenced emergency presidential authority soon after taking office and by late 2022 spoke to allies about using extraordinary powers. Language investigators say points to intent rather than impulse. By mid to late 2023, preparations had intensified with key military appointments and discussions over timing. At that point, prosecutors say martial law was no longer hypothetical, but an operational plan detached from any single political event.
Then, Hae-ryun, how extensive was this plan, and what does the investigation reveal about the scope of power that the former president and his allies were prepared to seize?
So the special prosecutor describes a power seizure plan that goes well beyond just, suspending the civil order. And investigators say that it involved using the military to paralyze the National Assembly, halt political activity, and neutralize opposition forces. Evidence recovered during the probe outlines plans to block parliamentary funding, occupy government institutions, and create an emergency legislative body to replace the assembly. Arrest and detention lists were also confirmed, including sitting lawmakers and election officials, with intelligence officers tasked with detaining election staff under claims of fraud. Prosecutors say this amounted to an attempt to seize all three branches of power, executive, legislative, and judicial, creating what they describe as an unchecked authoritarian system. In that context, the case is framed not as a technical breach of procedure, but as an attempt to overturn the constitutional order, a question now moving to the courts.
Whether this constitutes insurrection remains an open question, but the special prosecutor's findings appear to proceed on the premise that it does, with the final determination left to the courts.
Then what lines does the investigation draw in terms of, accountability, and what kind of unanswered political questions does this case leave behind?
So the special prosecutor says that the investigation has drawn some clear legal lines, but there are some questions that remain unanswered in the political field. And on the judicial and legislative fronts, the probe found no evidence of institutional involvement. Allegations that the Supreme Court or its leadership had prior knowledge of the martial law declaration were dismissed, as were claims that lawmakers obstructed the National Assembly's vote to lift it. At the center of power, however, responsibility was sharply defined. Over 6 months, investigators reviewed 249 cases, indicted 27 people, and detained 3 key figures, including former President Yoon. 8 former cabinet ministers and 9 presidential office officials were also sent to trial, extending accountability to senior aides. Legal experts say the true impact of the probe goes beyond the former president himself.
The key achievement of the special prosecutor's investigation lies in the indictments and first instance trials, which for the first time examined the alleged illegality of cabinet ministers failing to stop the president's dangerous use of emergency powers.
The probe also examines the political context, identifying power retention as the core motive, while noting legal risks facing Yoon and the former First Lady as contributing factors rather than separate charges. The findings point to a familiar conclusion. The legal process may be nearing completion, but political responsibility remains unsettled, underscoring the need for institutional reforms as the debate continues.
Well, we'll have to follow what happens next, both in the courtroom and on the political front. Do keep us posted. Hae-ryung, thanks for coming in tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.